Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholes. This week we've been reading from the Brothers Grimm in search of 3 new German folktales. And our final story is again from the Brothers Grimm. This one is from a different collection, however. This is The 3 Languages from Snowdrop and Other Tales. There once lived in Switzerland an old count who had an only son, but he was very stupid and could learn nothing. So his father said to him, "Listen to me, my son. I can get nothing into your head, try as hard as I may. You must go away from here, and I will hand you over to a renowned professor for a whole year." At the end of the year he came home again, and his father asked, "Now, my son, what have you learnt?"
"Father, I have learned the language of dogs."
"Mercy on us!" cried his father. "Is that all you have learnt? I will send you away again to another professor in a different town." The youth was taken there, and remained with this professor also for another year. When he came back, his father asked him again, "My son, what have you learnt?" He answered,
"I have learnt bird language."
Then his father flew into a rage and said, "Oh, you hopeless creature! Have you been spending all this precious time and learnt nothing? Aren't you ashamed to come into my presence? I will send you to a 3rd professor, but if you learn nothing this time, I won't be your father any longer." The son stopped with the 3rd professor in the same way for a whole year, and when he came home again and his father asked, "My son, what have you learnt?" he answered, "My dear father, this year I have learnt frog language." Thereupon his father flew into a fearful passion and said, "This creature is no longer my son. I turn him out of the house and command you to lead him into the forest and take his life." They led him forth, but when they were about to kill him, for pity's sake they could not do it, and let him go. They cut out the eyes and the tongue of a fawn in order that they might take back proofs to the old count. The youth wandered about, and at length came to a castle, where he begged a night's lodging. "Very well," said the lord of the castle. "If you like to pass the night down there in the old tower, you may, but I warn you that it will be the risk of your life, for it is full of savage dogs. They bark and howl without ceasing, and at certain hours they must have a man thrown to them, and they devour him at once." The whole neighborhood was distressed by the scourge, but no one could do anything to remedy it. But the youth was not a bit afraid, and said, "Just let me go down to these barking dogs, and give me something I can throw to them. They won't do me any harm." And he would not have anything else. As he would not have anything else, they gave him some food for the savage dogs, and took him down to the tower. The dogs did not bark at him when he entered, but ran around him wagging their tails in a most friendly manner, ate the food he gave them, and did not so much as touch a hair of his head. The next morning, to the surprise of everyone, he made his appearance again, and said to the lord of the castle, "The dogs have revealed to me in their own language why they live there, and bring mischief to the country. They are enchanted, and obliged to guard a great treasure which is hidden under the tower, and will get no rest till it has been dug up, and how that has to be done I have also learnt from them." Everyone who heard this was delighted, and the lord of the castle said he would adopt him as a son if he accomplished the task successfully. He went down to the tower again, and as he knew how to set to the work, he accomplished this task, and brought out a chest full of gold. The howling of the savage dogs was from that time forward heard no more. They entirely disappeared, and the country was delivered from the scourge. After a time, he took it into his head to go to Rome. On the way he passed a swamp in which a number of frogs were croaking. He listened, and when he heard what they were saying, he became quite pensive and sad. At last he reached Rome, at a moment when the Pope had just died, and there was a great doubt among the cardinals whom they ought to name as his successor. They agreed at last that the man to whom some divine miracle should be manifested ought to be chosen as Pope, Just as they had come to this decision, the young count entered the church, and suddenly 2 snow-white doves flew down and alighted on his shoulders. The clergy recognized in this the sign from heaven, and asked him on the spot whether he would be pope. He was undecided, and knew not whether he was worthy of the post, but the doves told him that he might accept, and at last he said, "Yes." Thereupon he was anointed and consecrated, and so was fulfilled what he heard from the frogs on the way, which had disturbed him so much, namely, that he should become pope. Then he had to chant mass, and did not know one word of it. But the 2 doves sat upon his shoulders, and whispered it to him. And that is the 3 languages, a tale from the Brothers Grimm. And, I like this story mainly because the Brothers Grimm has an entire collection of highly religious and religiousized tales that lives inside of their children's and household tales. So to see in this story a tale that is a bit about religion, but mostly about how some part of religion is really a fraud. If you think about it, the selection of the Pope based on the alighting of 2 doves and the knowledge passed on not by heavenly dispensation, but by learning, studying the unique skills of talking to animals. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget that if you'd like to help support the podcast, you can always head over to folktaleproject.com/support, where you'll find ways to help support the podcast on Patreon and Ko-Fi. Next week, we'll be back with 3 new tales. As always, thank you so much for listening.